For 34-year-old Tiffany Morrison, December 2023 should have been about Christmas plans with her 3 children. Instead, it became the month she tried to leave a controlling marriage. Tiffany was living in Liverpool Township, Ohio, with her husband Christopher and their children, aged 14, 13, and 10. She worked long hours and handled most of the household responsibilities. 4 days before she died, Tiffany sent a clear message to her husband. "I'm tired of being unappreciated and spoken down to," she wrote. "I honestly tried, but I'm done." She wanted her own place and fair custody arrangements. She wasn't trying to take the children away. She just wanted to move on and be civil. It was the message of a woman trying to do everything right. Christopher Morrison had other plans. Christopher and Tiffany Morrison had been together since they were 18 years old. Teenage sweethearts who had grown up together, married, and built a life in East Liverpool, Ohio. By December 2023, Christopher was 33 and Tiffany was 34. They'd been together for 16 years. They ran a business together called Essential Needs, a massage therapy practice in neighboring Kennedy, Pennsylvania. Both were licensed massage therapists who had trained together. They'd envisioned their whole futures together. Their social media pages were filled with happy photos of each other and their 3 children. They got married when Tiffany was pregnant with their youngest child, Landon, in March 2013. But the reality behind the photos was different. In 2021, feeling the financial pressures of running a small business, Christopher and Tiffany had moved in with Christopher's parents. They helped with childcare and tried to ease the stresses of being parents and entrepreneurs. But in 2022, Christopher's father died. This left his mother, Kay, alone, managing an increasingly unruly household with 3 children and 2 working parents. Kay and Tiffany had become very close. Kay would later say that Tiffany was a real part of the family, someone she doted on. The last time Kay saw Tiffany was on the evening of Monday, December 18th. She was standing by the Christmas tree when Tiffany came up to her. "I grabbed her," Kay would later recall. "I kissed her and hugged her and told her I loved her. And she said, 'I love you too.' And she went into the bedroom." Kay never saw her beloved daughter-in-law again. But beneath the surface, Christopher and Tiffany's marriage was crumbling. The division of responsibilities in the house had become a source of tension. Tiffany worked long hours at the massage parlor, then came home to handle the children's activities, the laundry, and dinner. She'd even taken a second job at a factory to help with their finances. Christopher, meanwhile, was apparently considering new opportunities in real estate. There were signs that should have warned Tiffany about what Christopher was capable of. When he was 14 years old, Christopher and his friends had tied up a dog and shot it. Kay later found the corpse on her property. Around the same time, he'd stabbed another boy in the arm. Kay had sent him to a treatment center to deal with his issues with anger and violence. But apparently that hadn't worked. And Christopher had been unfaithful before. From 2019 to 2020, he'd had a 2-year affair with a woman called Kayla Laurie, who worked with them at Essential Needs. It was an old wound that had never fully closed in their marriage. In the summer of 2023, Tiffany took that second job at a factory in Pennsylvania to help with their family's finances. It was there that she met Jake Hill. Jake was 18 years old and working at the same factory. They hit it off immediately, but Tiffany was hesitant. She told Jake they were better off just being friends. She'd said that Christopher wasn't right in the head, that he was nuts. Jake would later recall that she seemed scared of how Christopher might react. Despite her evident fear, in November 2023, just months before her death, Tiffany began a romantic relationship with Jake. For those first few weeks, she felt like she'd escaped the stresses of her fracturing marriage. In their text messages, Jake told her that Christopher didn't care about her, that he just didn't want to see her with anybody else. He said Christopher was manipulative, that he just wanted to see her stuck. and Tiffany was starting to realize that Jake was right. "You know what? I think you're right," she told Jake. "I finally had enough." The discovery came when Tiffany's teenage daughter found her text messages to Jake in December. The messages created an urgency in their relationship that hadn't been there before. Tiffany had to choose: Christopher, the man she'd loved for 16 years, or Jake, who offered her something new and an escape from her controlling husband. The week before her murder, she'd made her choice. She left the house for 5 days and stayed with Jake. She told him she wanted to leave Christopher and live with him instead. But on December 16th, as she was driving back to Jake's after work, she received a call from her daughter who wanted to have a movie night with her. Maybe she felt like she was betraying her family. Maybe the stress of keeping the affair from Christopher was too much. She agreed to come home and sent Jake a video message to break up with him. "It's over," she said. "I'm done. We're done talking." Jake didn't respond well to Tiffany's choice. He'd been drinking, and that night he made a decision that would seal Tiffany's fate. He sent Christopher explicit images of himself and Tiffany together over Facebook. Then he unsent them. But Christopher had seen them. Christopher Morrison was furious. He called Jake, and they squared up over the phone and over text. Jake told him, "Go get a job and support your family, clown." Christopher responded with threats. "Tell me when and where. I'll come to you." Christopher even made Facebook posts asking his friends for help finding Jake. One comment asked if he wanted Jake bagged and gagged. Jake was so frightened that he bought a gun for protection and nearly called the police. "I had it dialed into my phone," Jake would later say. "I just never hit the green call button." Then Christopher called Tiffany. He was screaming at her, telling her he would have done anything for her, that all she had to do was talk to him if there was a problem. In his twisted way, he was trying to reconcile. He told her he forgave her, that he understood why she'd had the affair because he'd been there himself with his affair with Kayla. Christopher was convinced they could work things out. He suggested marriage counseling. He pleaded with her not to leave immediately, offering to make her room comfortable, promising he'd sleep in the basement or on the couch if she wanted boundaries. But Tiffany had made her decision. And when pleading didn't work, Christopher resorted to violence. Christopher would later describe a confrontation in the basement of their home on December 19th. He said Tiffany was chasing him around, that they were wrestling whilst he went through her phone. He found encrypted messages between her and Jake. He was reading through them when he lost control. "So I shoved her," he would later tell police. "I did." He was worried he'd hit her head, but he said she seemed fine, just certain that she wanted to leave him. And that's when he agreed to drive her up to Jake's house. But Christopher Morrison had no intention of letting his wife leave him for another man. According to his friend Randy Slager, Christopher had a much darker plan. On the evening of December 18th, Christopher picked up Randy and brought him to the house. Kay and the children were all upstairs. Christopher took Randy down into the basement and showed him a bullet hole in the shower area. The area had been cleaned of blood. He told Randy he'd shot Tiffany. He showed him a photo on his phone of Tiffany with a gunshot wound to her face. Christopher wanted help disposing of her body, which he'd covered in a tarp and rolled up in a carpet. Initially, Randy refused, but Christopher had a gun. He threatened to kill everyone in the house, including his 3 children, if Randy called the police. So Randy helped him carry Tiffany's body up the stairs, out to Christopher's Jeep, and then into the shed. It was around 3 o'clock in the morning. Christopher Morrison had murdered his wife in their basement shower with a single gunshot to the head, and now he was forcing his friend to help him hide the evidence. The morning of December 20th, 2023, should have been about last-minute Christmas preparations. Instead, it was the morning Christopher Morrison went shopping for the tools to dismember his wife's body. At 9:03 a.m., surveillance cameras at Harbor Freight in Steubenville, Ohio, captured Christopher entering the store. He walked through the aisles like any other customer, selecting a reciprocating saw, what Americans call a sawzall, along with blades to go with it. The barcode on the saw would later show it was a model sold exclusively at Harbor Freight. 20 minutes later, a receipt was printed at Pet Supplies Plus in the same shopping plaza. Christopher had walked from one shop to another, carrying his deadly purchase. Then he went to the Walmart next door, where he bought rubbing alcohol, paper towels, and bin bags. Christopher Morrison was creating a paper trail to his own conviction, one purchase at a time. He made his way back to the house at 1655 Shadyside Road. What Christopher did next was calculated, methodical, and horrifying. He used the saw to dismember his wife's body, the woman who had borne his 3 children. He placed her remains into 6 bin bags, the very bin bags he'd bought at Walmart that morning. The saw, still in its original box with the blades, went into a 7th bag. 7 bags in total. 7 bags that contained what was left of Tiffany Morrison. He rolled all 7 bags inside a carpet and covered the bundle with a blue tarp. Then he carried it out to the shed in the garden. The shed was just yards from the house. Christopher installed a new lock on the shed door, to keep people out, to keep his secret in. But Christopher's methodical approach to covering up his crime went further. Between December 18th and 19th, he had carefully patched the bullet hole in the shower wall with caulk, smoothing it over until it was barely visible. Then he placed a decorative hook over the spot to hide it completely. To anyone who looked, nothing seemed amiss. During this time, Christopher carried on as if nothing had happened. He posted on social media, describing himself as single. He shared what he wanted for Christmas. The callousness was staggering. Kay would later tell police that Christopher had been acting strangely, telling people that Tiffany was sleeping and not wanting anyone to go downstairs. On Tuesday, December 19th, the day after he'd killed Tiffany, Christopher was emotionally upset and burning rubbish in the back garden. Kay noticed this unusual behaviour. They didn't normally burn rubbish very often. But Christopher Morrison had made a crucial mistake. In his arrogance, in his belief that he was clever enough to get away with murder, he'd told Randy what he'd done. For 2 days, nobody realised Tiffany was missing. It was the Christmas period. The children were busy with school, their friends, and their hobbies. Kay had multiple grandchildren to get gifts for. In the hectic household, Tiffany's absence went unremarked upon. But Randy Slager couldn't live with what he'd seen. On December 20th, early in the morning, he went to the police station with his father, who'd urged him to take what he knew to the authorities. Randy told them everything. How Christopher had shown him the bullet hole. How he'd seen the photo of Tiffany's body. How he'd been forced to help move her remains to the shed. The police looked into Tiffany's phone records. They showed that the last text message she'd sent had been at 6:50 p.m. on December 18th. Since then, she'd received 13 further texts and hadn't responded to any of them. Randy's story wasn't some hoax. Something had clearly happened to Tiffany that night. The police secured a search warrant for the house on Shadyside Road. They had Randy call Christopher to pick him up, to make sure he wouldn't be in the house when they arrived. They were mindful of his threats to kill his children and mother. At 6:10 p.m. on December 20th, Police Chief Jared Kinnemond personally pulled Christopher over in a traffic stop. During the stop, Christopher was cooperative, but revealed he was armed. Christopher had a handgun and a switchblade on him. This matched Randy's story about Christopher being armed and dangerous. They decided to take him to the Liverpool Township Police Department for questioning. Christopher Morrison sat in the Liverpool Township Police Department, putting on the performance of his life. He claimed he and Tiffany had been having marital problems, that they were talking divorce, that she'd been seeing someone else. Last night, we argued, and she said she was going back up to see her boyfriend, Christopher told investigators. And I said, "Okay, but you're not taking my vehicles." Christopher spun an elaborate story about kicking Tiffany out of his Jeep during an argument. He said he'd driven around with Randy, feeling bad about leaving her in the cold and snow, and had tried to find her. He claimed this was the last time he'd seen her. He painted himself as the wronged husband, jealous but not violent. He admitted to shoving Tiffany during their basement confrontation, but claimed she seemed fine afterwards. He said she wanted financial independence, that she was planning to get her own house, that they'd been talking about a 50-50 custody arrangement. Christopher was convincing in his lies. He knew exactly what had happened to his wife because he'd done it himself, but he sat across from detectives and claimed complete ignorance. He even suggested that if she was anywhere, she'd be with Jake, her boyfriend. He was trying to throw suspicion on a different suspect. Whilst Christopher sat in that interview room, claiming he didn't know where his wife was, officers were executing the search warrant at his house. And that's when they discovered the truth. In the basement shower, they found the patched bullet hole, the decorative hook that had been placed to hide it. Blood evidence that Christopher had tried to clean up. It was exactly as Randy had described. In the shed, behind the new lock that Christopher had installed, they found a rug rolled up around several black bin bags inside a clear tarpaulin. Tiffany Morrison had been found. At around 7 p.m, the Liverpool Township officers and the Columbiana County Major Crimes Task Force responded to the scene. The Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation was called in to process the evidence. During a second interview that same evening, investigators told him they knew what had happened. They knew what he'd done. Christopher immediately invoked his right to remain silent. "So, what you're saying is you want to exercise your rights?" they asked. "Yes, sir," Christopher replied. He said he just wanted to talk to his children, the same children he'd threatened to kill only 2 nights earlier. But the police didn't need him to confess. The crime scene spoke for itself. On Friday, December 22nd, Christopher Morrison appeared in Columbiana County Municipal Court for his bond hearing. Assistant Prosecutor Ryan Weichart asked for a high bond, and Judge Caitlin Dickey agreed. Christopher Morrison's bond was set at $1.5 million cash or surety. The only person who might have stood by Christopher was his own mother. But Kay Morrison, who had been just as close to Tiffany as she was to Christopher, had no question about her son's guilt. When police came to search the house again after Christmas, Kay was cooperative. She was upset, not with the constant interviews and warrants being served, but that her son had committed such a heinous crime in her own home. "This is sick, and I got to still live here," Kay told police. "He did this in my house. I don't know where his freaking head was at." Kay had no interest in covering up for Christopher. She told police he'd been acting strangely on December 18th and 19th. When Christopher called her from jail, she didn't want to talk to him. "I don't have nothing to say to him," she told police. On January 21st, 2024, an autopsy was conducted by the Cuyahoga County Medical Examiner's Office. Tiffany Morrison had died from a single gunshot wound to the head. The manner of death was ruled a homicide. In late January 2024, a special session of the Columbiana County Grand Jury returned a 6-count indictment against Christopher Morrison: aggravated murder, gross abuse of a corpse, possessing criminal tools, and 2 counts of tampering with evidence, plus 2 firearm specifications. The indictment stated that Christopher Morrison had acted purposely and with prior calculation and design. Christopher Morrison was charged with murder, and during the legal proceedings, his defense team tried to have his arrest recordings thrown out. But during a suppression hearing in July 2024, Christopher made a catastrophic mistake. His defense counsel had put him on the stand, hoping to support their motion to suppress the police interview. It backfired spectacularly. Assistant Prosecutor Steve Iacovone asked, "Were you under a lot of stress because Tiffany Morrison was chopped up in your home?" Christopher listed other stressors: his business, his 3 children, the strain on his marriage. Iacovone returned, "So the fact that Tiffany Morrison was dead in your shed at your home, that wasn't a stressor for you." Christopher, making a fatal error for his case, said that it was a stressor. Iacovone zoomed in. "So you knew where she was. You shot her, chopped her up, and left her in the shed." Christopher's response: "Yes." Christopher had just confessed under oath to murdering and dismembering his wife. His own defense team had put him on the stand, and he'd admitted everything. Following this catastrophic mistake, Christopher had little choice. On August 30th, 2024, he pleaded guilty to all 6 counts and both firearm specifications. On September 17th, 2024, Christopher Morrison stood before Judge Megan Bickerton for sentencing. Tiffany's family was there to give victim impact statements. Her mother, Ruth Molly, spoke about the devastating loss. "My daughter was trying to get away from this monster. Every time I pull up to that house, I envision what he did to my daughter." Christopher read a prepared statement. "I let all common sense and reason leave me. Our children now have to go forward without either of us, and there is nothing I regret more. I'll be sorry for this until my last breath." But Judge Bickerton wasn't having it. She had harsh words for Christopher.
"You call her a bad mom. How dare you? And then you stand up here today and read of someone who was in love with this person. Is that how you treat people you love?" I think the state nailed it. You're a narcissist. It's only about you.
The judge noted that Christopher's first thought after killing Tiffany wasn't, "What did I do?" but, "How do I get away with it?" Christopher was sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole for a minimum of 25 years. He was 34 years old when sentenced. He wouldn't be eligible for parole until he was nearly 60. Today, Christopher Morrison remains in prison in Ohio. His 3 children are being raised by their grandmother Kay, deprived of both their mother and father by a brutal, senseless crime. They continue to live at the same house where their mother was murdered. Tiffany Morrison was 34 years old when she died. She'd been born in Germany on a US Army base and had worked tirelessly as a licensed massage therapist to provide for her 3 children whilst handling household responsibilities and taking a second job to help with finances. She wanted her own place and fair custody arrangements. She wasn't trying to take the children away, she just wanted to move on and be civil. Christopher Morrison couldn't accept that his wife had the right to choose her own life, and when control and manipulation failed, he chose murder.